So it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Glenk, who is researcher and lecturer at the Messerli Research Institute at the Vienna Vet School, and she is in the Department of Comparative Medicine, and she will talk to you about a subject that is very dear to my heart. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, François. I'll take this one.
Okay.
Thank you very much for kindly introducing me, and I think it was a given the topic of his own presentation, I think he was the perfect match to introduce me, so thank you for this. So this is a topic with an importance that, in my opinion, cannot be overstated. But before I dive deeper into the topic, I would like to share with you my previous experience with IAHAIO, because in fact I was in 2010 in Stockholm. I was presenting a study of video analysis behavior study with adolescents that received an AAI program, and I was focusing on emotion expression and emotion regulation in this talk. And then 3 years after, I went to the United States. It was my second time in the US. We went to fancy Chicago. Who was in Chicago as well? Raise your hands. Oh, some of you. And at that time, I mean, in 2010, I was still an undergraduate researcher. And in 2013, I was so excited to present my own research, the research from my PhD project. And the title of the presentation was Minding the Animal Side, about therapy dogs' welfare in AAIs. And that's what we are dealing with today also. When it comes to the concept of stress, we should consider that stress is caused by a stimulus that can come either from the outside or from the inside. And I was coming a long way from Vienna, and I was suffering from quite some jet lag. And this is a very good example of a stress response, because if you kind of mess up the circadian rhythm, this is a severe to moderate stressor, and you somehow have to deal with this challenge. And it takes more than 1 day. So I was experiencing middle of the night awakenings, being tired during the day. So I could feel my body had to deal with this stress. So it is all about dealing with challenges. And the stress mechanism is so fascinating because it's highly evolutionarily rooted. So we see the same stress responses, the same stress pathways in any vertebrate species. And the primary mission of a stress response is to guarantee survival in case of a potential, and that is quite important. It doesn't necessarily have to be a real threat. It's enough if it's imagined or if it's just potential to promote survival in case of any experience of threat. And the overall goal from a psychological, biological perspective is to cope with the situation and to maintain balance. I think this has been very nicely explained by Kitty yesterday evening. So this is all about maintaining balance. And another word for this maintenance of balance is homeostasis. So when it comes to stressors, especially if we look at dogs or if we watch ourselves, so there are different types of qualities of stressors. So they can be of physical nature, so could be sudden noise, or it could also be a sudden shift in temperature. Then we have physiological or biological stress, can be the experience of pain. It can be a condition of thirst, hunger, or also the presence of the female reproductive cycle. So also the reproduction cycle is related to significant changes in the secretion of stress hormones. This is why we should never consider a female dog in estrus being in sessions. But I heard that this has happened before, so I think it's very important to consider it. Social stress is among the strongest stressors, both in humans and animals, because we are social species. So we have to deal with social stress, such as separation distress, or even isolation, or also competition, between conspecifics or also individuals from another species. Stressors can also be on the cognitive level, so both over and under stimulation lead to stress. And also the idea of a situation, so what we call anticipation, this can be also a source of stress if we feel that we do not have enough resources to overcome such a potential or actual threat. Stressors can also be of a psychological nature, so it can be fear, anxiety, it can be aggression, also the phenomenon of learned helplessness. And also the environment is crucial, so the chemical environment, for instance, the presence of toxins, if there are medications, but also environmental pollution. So, and taking all of these together, we are exposed to a variety of stressors in our daily lives, in our professions, but happily enough, we are made to deal with this stuff. So stress responses are species-specific, but they are also individual. So as I said before, there is a stimulus coming from the inside or the outside. This is called the stressor. Usually the stressors enters the brain via sensory pathways. And in the central nervous system, there's a kind of a processing state in which a subjective experience of the situation evaluates and shapes the actual outcome of the stress response. So whether there are some previous experience associated with the actual situation, and also the amount of resources that is there at this special moment. And then we can see or measure the stress response, we can observe the behavioral output, and what becomes apparent is that stress responses vary individually. So one dog will kind of deal with a certain situation in a different way than another dog. And making this a little bit more complicated, not even within the same individual, you have the same stress responses. So it is pretty much dependent on the experiences of that day the dog had, of the encounter with conspecifics, or even sleep quality of the night. So we see kind of a variance. And I think it's also important to go over the major stress hormone pathways that are related to the experience of stress. And first of all, I will see if this works. Oh, this is nice. So you can see here the scheme of a brain. In this case, it's a human brain. And the probably fastest pathway is the secretion of noradrenaline. So if you experience a certain threat situation, for instance, if you're in traffic, if you're driving a car and somebody's coming from the side and you just manage to be on the brake, you can really find an experience and feel the rush of adrenaline that's really, I don't know how to say it. If you have experiences, you know what I'm talking about. And this results from sympathetic nervous stimulation. It's originated here in an area near the brainstem called locus ceruleus, and here noradrenaline gets secreted from sympathetic fibers all over the body. And this initial secretion of noradrenaline kind of induces another pathway that is related to the secretion of both noradrenaline and adrenaline from the medulla of the adrenal gland. So this is also a system that acts quite fast, so within milliseconds and seconds. The pathway that is a little bit slower is the Hpa pathway. It involves the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and again the adrenal glands. In this case, the adrenal cortex releases corticosteroids, and both in dogs and humans, the most prominent and important corticosteroid is cortisol. And I would like to highlight at this point that the function of these hormones is not to label that there is stress in the body. they have important metabolic, cardiovascular, and immunomodulatory effects. So we know that these hormones react strongly in response to stress, but they have various functions. Their function is not just to label that there is a stressor going around. And these are important to consider if we think about stress-related health effects. So when these hormones are released into the bloodstream, we find at the central nervous system there's increasing levels of attention, which can be also quite beneficial, we know. Also increased level of alertness, and kind of aggression is also kind of related to heightened alertness, so this kind of makes sense. However, during acute stress, we can also see peak performances, and I will explain this in more detail a bit later. During an acute stress response, we are also less prone to experience pain. So this is also kind of a protection mechanism, and I was like first aid during a terrible accident where a motorcyclist broke his arm, and you know the bone was kind of coming out here. And he was like, he wanted to stand up and just ride his bike again because he thought he was fine. So he didn't feel any pain at this moment. And this can be attributed to the secretion of endogenous opioids, such as endorphins and enkephalins. On the peripheral level, you can see heart rate and blood pressure go up in response to noradrenaline and adrenaline. We can also see an increase in breath rate, and the blood supply is shifted in that the brain, the heart, and also the skeletal muscles will receive more blood than, for instance, the periphery, like the hands or the feet. So that is why you may experience cold hands when you're stressed. Immune function also goes up in response to stress, and when we look at the white blood cells, I mean, a substantial stress situation will cause in the blood something called like a stress leukogram. So when we look at the blood, we see that the number of leukocytes increase, and then also there's a shift in population of leukocytes. And related to the secretion of the corticosteroids, levels of inflammation go down. In general, we find effects on metabolism, so anything that is catabolic, so your sugar and fat levels in the blood will increase to provide you more energy, and any restorative function or vegetative function, such as digestion, growth, or reproduction, these are going down. And I want to highlight again, this is true for acute stress, because when we look at chronic stress, it's no more that you're not sensitive to pain, so you may overreact to pain. And when we look at immune function, we know also in chronically stressed individuals, the immune system is less able to fight pathogens. Dosis facet venemum, this is Latin, and it means kind of the poison comes with doses. What's the amount of stress that we can deal with, or that's even beneficial to us performing our work? So a certain level of performance is related to activation of the stress pathways. And in fact, if you don't, or if you have just very, very, very low levels of noradrenaline, adrenaline, and cortisol, you probably won't make it out of bed anymore, because they are essential to our normal functioning. And there is something called a state of eustress, often referred to the so-called positive stress. And this is the moment where you really are ready to perform, where your responses are quick and concise, and you're very centered and focused. When the level of stress goes on, persists for longer periods of time, then sooner or later you come to a state of frustration or discomfort. And at this point, you're likely to also spot behavioral or related behaviors. When stress persists for long periods and in very, very high intensities, then a level of limited capacity and almost no more learning is achieved. So this is related to the famous 4F strategies, behavioral strategies that are called fight, flight, freeze, or fool around. And working in AAIs, you want to remain in this calm and eustress level and never get into the discomfort or even 4F behavior levels. It would be very easy if we could just go down to the dogs and ask them, when are you stressed? So what can we do to keep you in balance? Would be much easier for us researchers also. Unfortunately, it is not so easy, and we have to deal with what I like to call the welfare indicators instead. And I also would like to invite you to kind of change perspective, because in our anthropomorphic view, we have kind of a filter that is very human. However, when we want to evaluate the animal experience, I would like to invite you to join the view from all 4 paws. And you can see here from the video positions, what the dog sees, what the dog experiences is pretty different from what we see and experience. In fact, dogs have very limited to almost none involvement when it comes to daily routines and to the activities we perform. It's unlikely that a dog would raise the paw and say, I want to go to the nursing home and spread happiness for elderly people. No, it's us who thinks it is a nice thing to do, and it's us who believe that is important, and we know that our dog is a fantastic partner to achieve our goals. So it's us who decide, and then dogs are in the position of, they have to rely on our empathy, but also on our professional level and expertise, what we would call best practice, because we have to guarantee this precondition. And when we talk about recognizing stress, I mean, you have to recognize signs of stress before you can adjust your handling. So recognizing stress is essential. And when you think you go out of the street, the average dog owner, how successful are they in recognizing dog stress signs? What do you think? Okay, I see some heads like here. Not too successful. So there has been a study in 2012. 60% of dog owners, just regular average dog owners that were asked what is stress, 60% managed to provide a correct definition. But this also means that 40% had no idea. 20%, however, believe that it is just a short-term condition without any relevance for health. I think it is interesting to say that in this study they also found that owners who are able to recognize the subtle signs of stress, and in this case this was turning away the head or the lip licking, yawning, or also losing hair. These were referred to as subtle signs of stress, and owners who were aware that these behaviors could be stress-related, they would judge their own dog in general in their daily lives as moderately to very stressed, because they see, okay, these behaviors are like shown very often. Owners who failed to recognize the subtle signs of stress, who just recognized, okay, the dog is experiencing stress, they said, okay, when they're shivering, when they are whining with a tucked-in tail, so the very obvious signs of stress, owners who just knew them, they would rate the dog as minimally stressed. And you probably know why I'm bringing this, so it is about your own knowledge, how you would evaluate the situation. Another study has looked at how an average dog owner would rate levels of stress and levels of pain. And when the ratings of the dog owners were compared to the ratings of veterinary experts, then it became clear that dog owners are much more accurate when it comes to pain than when it comes to stress. So there is a certain amount of work needed to be done by people like us, I guess. This corresponds to something that Professor Serpel introduced in his talk. There's a study from 2019, a very recent study, that looked at different organizations in Northern America and Canada. And they looked at the criteria needed for application of volunteers. So what different organizations, what material they published on their websites. And in this study, more than 320 programs were identified, and then they randomly chose 64 programs. And looking at demographics, so most organizations required the name and the age of both the owner and the dog, the breed of the dog. However, there was little emphasis on the dog's size or weight, the type of collar, where they had just a collar or a harness, but also to what methods the dog was trained in, or even in what training facility the dog usually goes to. So these were not considered. When it came to dog skills, they were looking for dogs accepting a stranger, being reliable on basic commands, just for example, like down, sit, or stay. And they find it important to monitor the reaction to other dogs. What it did not test was a restraining hug, the behavior of the dog when a treat was offered, passing between strangers, and also the behavior in response to an unusually acting individual, such as staggering or gesturing, which you surely find in some of usual AAI populations. And I would like to stress here the third aspect. These were further criteria. So they required to have an AAI certificate, they required to have a certain temperament in the dog, and they required to have the dog vaccinated. However, there were not any special requirements for handlers. I'm talking about skills, about professional background, about the handler being in supervision, or the handler just following up some ongoing monitoring or whatever. So this is exactly what James Serpell said, and it's weird because the handler and the AVMA had in their paper on animal-assisted intervention safety, they refer to the handler as the responsible person, which I like very, very much, that's why I have it here. The responsible person is 50% of the working team, however, has 100% responsibility for the whole process, for the individuals, and especially also for his or her dog. And it is about recognizing the signs of stress when they appear. This is also a famous quote by James Serpell. And what can you see here? Are the dogs enjoying themselves? Are the dogs interested in contact with the individual? No, so you can see turned head, you can see lip licking here, and you can see also a condition that is described by the literature of Professor de Koester, the so-called whale eye, when you can see the white in the eye. Usually it's a condition of fear. And kind of safeguarding the dog is probably not enough to just touch them, so you would have to change the situation so the dog is comfy. And especially for the purpose of this talk today, I went into the scientific literature to present you what's available, and I did kind of a time study also, so I was very interested in presenting you the time flow of published research papers in peer-reviewed journals. So what you will see here, there are no bachelor, or master thesis, it's just research papers in a peer-reviewed journal here. So the first one was published in 1999. It was a survey, telephone survey, and you can see then here 10 years, nothing essential happened. There was another study, which was merely a case study in 2001, and then we had another pause of approximately 5 years. But after this time, these 15 years, you can see that there's research following up almost every year. And you can also see that 2017 appeared to be the most popular year for publication of dog welfare in AAIs, where we had 3 papers. And I'm also glad to announce that in 2019, which is not over yet, there are already 2 papers published. And as an active peer reviewer, I know there's more to come. So you can see that this topic is getting more and more important in science. And this is also the spirit and also the idea that I had from this conference. So in 2010, just very few people were talking about animal welfare, and this time it's anywhere. So this is really, really great. I will briefly go over this because since we are now so much focusing on animal welfare, this is probably known to you. So what are the methods that researchers use when they are assessing animal welfare? So I think the golden standard is the behavior, because the behavior allows you to also kind of reference the interaction. So if you're videotaping a session, if you're monitoring the dog's behavior, it will also allow you to see what was first. So what caused this certain behavior, which can provide valuable insights. So the video analysis is probably the golden standard. And if you have the video data, there are specialized programs for ethologists, so you can look at repeating patterns. It can become quite sophisticated. The other methods are, we heard here at the conference, research on salivary biomarkers. So basically, the golden standard here is to measure biomarkers in body fluids, such as saliva or blood or even urine. Can also be measured in feces or hair. You're gathering your samples, then you're going through the laboratory, and then you have some kind of a quantitative analysis. In early times, it was the radioimmunoassay. Today, it's more likely to be the ELISA or the EAI. We also had some studies here on heart rate monitoring, so it's also possible to apply an electrocardiogram. And this was also used in previous studies that measured dog welfare. And last but not least, it's also the subjective experiences of the human individuals involved. So previous research methods included protocols for animal handlers, questionnaires, standardized questionnaires from psychology, or even qualitative interviews for animal handlers or also for staff members, of just any external observer would be possible. And I have picked for you some of the more recent results. So across studies, it was seen that you're more likely to see stress-related behaviors in younger dogs, especially under 7 years of age. Interestingly, dogs that were rated as minimally stressed by their animal handlers during a session, they had lower post-session cortisol levels, and this is what you would expect from a dog that's minimally stressed. And this is pretty much in contrast to another finding of the same study, where they found no differences from pre to post-session in dogs that were rated as severely stressed by their handlers. So there seems to be kind of a gap between the human perception and what's actually going on in the dog. Higher cortisol levels were related to more stress-related behaviors and less sociopositive behaviors. And the sociopositive behaviors, these are usually the behaviors that you're looking for to see in an AAI. Also, dogs who scored higher on fear of strangers in a questionnaire on dog behaviors, I think it kind of makes sense. So from these dogs, you would also expect less sociopositive behaviors. And if an owner would rate a dog high on fear of strangers, I was wondering why the dogs were involved at all. So, yeah. This is some of my PhD work. So I was interested in whether dogs would show different physiological responses, whether they were working without a collar, without a harness, just on their own, or whether they were fixed on a leash. So what we found was this was a control measure that was taken at the same time at home. This was prior to a session, and this was directly after the session. And because salivary cortisol has a certain time lag of 15 to 20 minutes, when you collect the sample just after the session, it corresponds to levels that are somehow in the session. And you can see here, the dogs off-leash have significantly lower salivary cortisol levels. Another recent study identified tail down and lip licking at the most frequent stress behaviors. And another study looked at urinary adrenaline and noradrenaline, and they found that these two catecholamines were more increased if dogs were restrained for longer periods during the session. And this is also a kind of practice, I would say, why do people do it at all? And it's not so surprising that this has an impact on the physiological responses. I think what's good to see, and indicated here by several studies, there are no differences in physiological patterns when you compare working days with scheduled sessions to baseline days when they're just at home, when they're in a control condition. However, one study found higher heart rates on working days, and 2 studies indicated that higher stress levels and cortisol levels occur when the dog is placed in an unfamiliar environment where it has never been before. In this study on the catecholamines, you can see that noradrenaline concentrations from pre to post session decreased over time in repeated AAIs. So there was a constant group of people, and the dog was introduced to the group, and you can see that level of stress hormones seem to decrease if they participate for longer periods of time. And this is also corresponds to this novel study. I think it was presented by François as well. So this study found that if the dogs visit the same institutions for two sessions per week compared to just 1 session per week or 2 sessions a month or even 1 session a month, they are more likely to exhibit lower cortisol levels. In one of our studies, we found that the decrease of cortisol from pre to post session shows a correlation with the behaviors lip licking and body shake. And when we look at welfare challenges, certainly the environmental temperature plays a crucial role because dogs are very sensitive to temperature because they cannot sweat and they have to pant. And also this kind of lower substrate, at least in my region, you will see it frequently in front of schools or kindergarten. So this is to keep the shoes clean. But for dogs, it may be quite uncomfortable to pass. So some dogs wouldn't want to pass here. Or which you can see also frequently in hospital settings is a very, very clean and sleepy floor. And this can also be an issue to many dogs. They may be afraid to walk here. Or also if they are older and have some age-related issues, it can be quite bad for them. Also the availability of water. We would suggest that it's clear to always have your dog be able to drink water at any time. So before I did my PhD, I was traveling all through Austria and see what people do. No, not all people provide their dog a bowl of water. It's also essential how the animal reaches the site of intervention. So whether it is in public transport, how it is comfortable by traveling with the car, etc. So it's also about how you get to the institution you should consider. So there's quite a certain amount of stress that's possible. And also this is a school bell. I have no idea if you have them in the States as well. In Austria, they and the moment you hear it, what children do? They jump up and they run to the floor. If you're there with your dog, this can be quite a challenge. And now we have an important topic. So it is mainly about dogs have to accept strangers. They should be friendly and we want them to approach strangers. So the least thing we want to have during intervention is to experience inappropriate behaviors toward the dog by either the recipients or the staff members. And I have highlighted the staff members because to me it was clear if I enter a hospital, if I enter a school, I would expect the staff members to behave accordingly. But no, they are calling the dog, they may be teasing the dog, They may even be screaming or jumping around, and there are also, unfortunately, some incidences of dogs being punched, and not just once, but repeatedly. So recipients and staff members may be a serious source of stress for the dogs. And I have brought two videos for you, where again, you will see it in a moment. I have to zoom in and out, I'm sorry, but there is no other way I can do it. Not even within 9 years of research experience, I still have to do it this way. In this case, there are no behavioral instructions for staff and children before the dog enters a building, and you can see what happens here. It's about 20 hands reaching out for the dog, so you can see the dog's head moving around, how it can escape and how it can get away. And as soon as it moves along, still children try to touch and to reach for it. However, the dog makes its way, and here the video ends. And in contrast to this experience, we have another video where the children and staff members were instructed how to behave respectfully to have the dog in the building. So here the dog was coming, it was running, it already knew the institution, and you can see it has enough space to orient itself. She's looking here and there, has enough possibility to sniff at certain people, and is willing to turn around and go back again. In the first condition, the dog didn't want to go back again into the crowd, which is totally understandable, I think. And then it's going out again. So I hope with this little illustration here, also you can relate to why the dog would prefer a certain situation over the other. I would suggest that informed consent for staff members should be mandatory, and behavioral instructions for the recipients. It's not beneficial if you walk into a room with a crowd in it and you start about behavioral instructions the time the dog is with you, because they will not listen, because they will watch the dog. So you have to inform them before, rather than doing it during the intervention or after the intervention, to have the dog comfortable during the sessions. Also, when we think about accepting strangers, so I propose that in this room, most of you would agree when I say the way you approach someone affects the way he or she will approach you back. And this is so true with dogs. So if strangers are approaching with a friendly voice, a friendly facial expression, and if they are approaching at a normal pace, regular pet dogs will show high levels of contact seeking. In contrast, if you have a stranger approaching in a threatening manner, this means that the stranger is moving slowly, it's staring at the dog, has the upper body slight bent over, then dogs will avoid the gaze, they will vocalize more, and they will surely back away instead of displaying social positive behaviors. In this conference, there was great emphasis at relationship and bonds, which is beautiful. At least in dogs, we have some data that the human-dog bond can be called even a bond, because it resembles and it fulfills all the criteria that are established in studies on mother-child interactions. So humans can be a secure base for exploration in an unfamiliar environment. Humans for dogs can also be a secure base when something scares them or they get uncomfy. And dogs usually show separation distress when they are separated from their owners. Behaviors between securely and insecurely attached dogs in AAAs did not differ. This is also a novel study from 2019. However, dogs spend more time in proximity to and touching the recipient rather than their owner. However, they gaze more at the owners. It's interesting that they found that insecurely attached dogs gazed even more at the handler. So the authors kind of speculated whether this could be that the dogs needed more reassurance because they were maybe not so stable or not so relaxed on their own. Another study from 2017 studied synchronization patterns, and they found more joint attention and also more gaze synchrony, okay, between dogs and handlers during AAIs. And they also stated that dogs definitely have individual preferences to tolerate physical contact. Training methods are essential. The thing I want to say is reward-based training is mandatory. So don't use punishment, and never, never, ever induce fear or anxiety into your dog because it will critically impact its welfare. Fear tells us to avoid something, and fear does not prime us toward any desirable behaviors. And it ends up with limited cognition, creativity, and learning. Dogs respond to human faces if they are threatening by displaying lip-licking behavior. And you can see that also in sessions. So here we have examples from a reading session, and this was an outdoor session where the parent of a participating child tried to reach for the dog. And what you can see here also is the lip licking, or another stress-related behavior, the yawning. So these pictures to most people look pretty much the same, but can you spot the difference? So in this case, the dog is kind of crowded by the children in the reading session, and it's also on the leash, and you can see also another dog in the back, and it's yawning here. And here you can see the dog has plenty of space to move itself through the room, and again here also there's no restraint by a human. What I'd like to stress also is that forced position and restraints will cause increases in heart rates, decreases in heart rate variability, and there is less acceptance towards being touched by a stranger. And just to end, I will show you the therapy dog wellness strategies. Provide ample opportunities to rest and sleep. If you provide physical exercise, do not stress the dog, have it mild. Provide positive relationships, gentle routines, and be a haven of safety. Also, familiar routines, stuff that the dog is used to, that the dog knows, are helpful. Be gentle to your dog and yourself. Thank you.